This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our Patreon community. This one comes from Robert Bolstad, and he asks an important question. It has to do with corporations when we try here in the United States to raise taxes on them, and then they threaten to leave if we dare do that. That has been standard practice for many, many, many years, and it has always worked pretty well with our political leaders, Republican and Democrat alike, who tend to melt, to cave in, and to learn their lesson not to do that again. But Robert Bolstad's question asks, is this not an empty threat? What, in fact, might be done so that you would not have to respond to corporations, so that finally you could and would be able to tax them in the way that any minimum notion of justice would require? And Robert Bolstad is right, and I want to explain why and how. Here's the issue. If you raise taxes on corporations and they threaten to leave, would it be possible to ask them, as Robert suggests, to turn off the lights and close the door on their way out? In other words, to say, go if that's what you want. And the answer is sure. Now, you don't want to do that if, when they go, you lose the jobs, you lose the income, you lose the taxes they do pay, however low the rate they have connived to get. But we are not limited to those situations. It's not the either or the corporations would like us to believe it is. Let me explain. The government has all kinds of recourse to deal with corporations that threaten to evade taxes or leave if you don't let them evade taxes. For example, there already exist countries in Europe that I know of who have laws in place, laws that require any corporation that's going to leave to give a minimum number of months or even years notice. Yes, that allows the government in those societies to take all kinds of steps to mitigate the damage done to the community, to the union, to the workers, to their families when companies up and leave. They can't just go. And there are punishments in place were they to try to leave before giving notice or with too little time between when they give notice and when they leave, as the law specifies. That's the mildest form of constraint, and it does not exist here in the United States in most instances. There's a second thing a government could do, which would be interesting, wouldn't it? That's called a boycott. It would be the response of the government, officially, or if you like, unofficially, that any company that is thought to have left the country in order to avoid taxes, to evade taxes, that it be subjected to a politically organized campaign in which American buyers of whatever that company makes are fully and carefully informed of what has happened and explained that if they were to switch their buying from the company that has left to competitor companies that did not leave, that stayed here and are paying their taxes, this would be a sort of public information that would have a very serious effect on the decision of any company to get up and leave. Number 3 possibility. If you leave, then the government will calculate the damage done to the community, the workers, the whole country, from your leaving. That damage is a result of your decision as a business. Over the years that you've been a business, you have been on the receiving end of all sorts of government supports. Tax cuts of all kinds, subsidies of all kinds, roads that were built and maintained running to and from your factory, your office, your store, cleaning of the street, all kinds of services. Some of those you paid for with your taxes, but not all of them because your taxes were very low. And many of them you didn't pay for with taxes. Therefore, before you leave, you are required to pay some of the damages your leaving will incur for the folks you leave behind. In other words, you have responsibilities you cannot evade as you try to evade your taxes. And then finally, the one I like best personally. If you leave and we determine that your leaving had as a significant goal and purpose the evasion of taxes that were already in place or that we were intending to put into place, we will seize your factory, your office, your store, and we, that's the government of this country, will offer to the workers in your place of business the right to continue it as a workers' co-op so that you may leave and you may indeed take some of the assets of the corporation with you. But you will not be able to flood this country with products from another place because you're going to have a new competitor, namely the worker co-op that takes over the entity, the enterprise that you used to run before you decided to leave to evade taxes. These are just some of the mechanisms that could be put into place. And if they were, you can be very sure that many of the decisions made by handfuls of corporate directors and major shareholders about leaving the United States to evade their tax share would have been very different. They will be different from now on because such a set of practices that became the norm would send a very clear message, and that would make many of those decisions about leaving not take place and be reversed by a commitment to stay. You know, the history of capitalism in the United States has been an endless series of accommodations, supports of all kinds for the businesses that grew big and strong here, in large part because of those supports. If they're going to leave now, after 10, 20, 40, 60, 100 years of supports, they've got some paying back to do. They just don't get the right to get up and leave. If we had a proper democratic politics, all those kinds of measures would already have been in place. Their absence testifies to who runs the political structure of this country. That's why, quote unquote, free enterprise has allowed them to push and lobby for every sort of support and then get up and leave whenever the profitability suits them. That doesn't have to be the case. This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work.